We are based in London and operating globally, obviously. More than half of our projects happens outside of London. And we work in this liminal place, combining arts, technology, and science as much as we can. And we have two horses. One horse is running for the commercial businesses, so we can actually subsidize the other horse where we run for art projects, our passion projects. And I'm going to show you a video of what we've been doing for the last 5-6 years. And you can elaborate if you like more the studio part.
Yeah, so we're, as Sandra said, turn it down a tad. So we're there's 5 of us, but then there's 8 of us, and then there's however many we need in order to make the projects happen. I guess we say collaboration is at the kind of heart of everything that we do. We have ideas and we go and find the best people to work with, whether that's a museum with an archive of interesting things that they've scanned, whether that's a person who's expert in one particular technology or one particular programmatic language. It's all about finding the best and most interesting people to work with and collaborate with. So there's anywhere between 5 and 15 of us at any one time working on particular projects.
And what you've seen so far is, a broad range of projects that we are combining robotics with reverse engineered caustics, which is a topic by itself. That's the audience response in general. And I think there's one gift that explains everything we do so well. We are literally blurring the boundaries between digital and physical. And we use heavily technology and cutting edge technology. And I've got this funny picture of galloping horses from 1821. And using this as an analogy because we've been living with horses for 5,500 years. We've been drawing them on the caves for like 55,000 years. And we are yet to see that they can actually walk or run like this by just like Muybridge's invention of this incredible chronophotography. So and how does this take us to virtual reality and augmented reality, because it's emerging mediums, and I'm sure you are all familiar with the 5th wave of virtual reality. It's been tested, tried, and all those immersive mediums kind of revolving around it. And how it's going to get into our lives is a big question mark. And, if you did ask this question in 2014, everyone had a different opinion, and we're supposed to be wearing headsets right now. Obviously, that's not happening. But when we look at the future, it's quite interesting. Kurt von Manswerth's Pyramid of Technology is kind of explaining really nicely. You've got like domestication of fire on top, which we don't consider as technology or alphabet. But right underneath, there are phones. Forms of communication is actually a piece of technology. And probably augmented reality, as we imagine today, will take a place there. And VR is in this applied field and will probably expand, but I don't know how far it can go. And while looking at this landscape of technology and virtual reality, augmented reality as practitioners, we stumbled upon this incredible research on the Code of Ethical Conduct by Michael Meltry and Thomas Metzger. And this scares me a lot. And what we are trying to do is take this into consideration and give some examples of work, how virtual reality take place and how it can be useful for us in many ways to make us more human, better human, or enhanced humans. I'll take it from there to one of the projects we've done in 2015, which was almost the beginning of this journey for us. Although we've been doing those real-time applications in interactive installations for quite some times. Obviously, with the successful Kickstarter project of Oculus Rift, gave us an incredible opportunity to do that immersion much cheaper. Then we got to this commission in Drysdale Forest in 2015. Would you like to talk about the...
Yeah, we know that this project is in your archive, I think, in the Open Documentary Labs archive, so you can find out a lot more about it there. But it was a commission from a festival called Abandoned Normal Devices, which if you haven't heard of, I highly recommend you look into them. They're a really wonderful festival about the future of cinema that takes place in the north of England every 2 years, and they move location. So for this particular festival in 2015, they were in Drysdale Forest, and they asked us to take inspiration from the forest, and that's the only parameter they gave us, apart from the logistical ones of it needs to be outdoors, obviously, and it needs to be suitable for a festival of like family right through to kind of industry people who were going to visit the works. So we had about 3 months to make it from the point of commission, maybe more. It was preceded by a research project which was funded by Nesta, which is an innovation agency based in London. The research was about looking at 360-degree cameras and the aerial views of the Earth, basically. So the original intention had been to make this piece about looking down on the forest. But when we got the camera up there and realised how ugly the forest was from above, we decided to take a very different approach.
Yeah. But also what we realized as well was we know nothing about nature. Like personally, it was this moment of literally nothing. You can't differentiate 5 trees. So I've got a little test. I love doing this. How many of you cannot name all the logos here? Right. How many of you can name all the leaves? The bottom one. Right. So an average human being can name 430 logos. Obviously, this is part of the survival. You should be able to differentiate a cooking oil from the bleach, and therefore you have to know all those things. But that gave us this moment of illumination. Right, we got to learn this. And led us to do a research about this forest and kind of environment and who lives there, who are those inhabitants. And we start looking into the animals, the other specimen that we are sharing that forest with, and looking into their perception of that forest rather than a human-centric perception. And, I had this great tune. I was gonna clean my room. That was it, but, so the question kind of emerged. Obviously, we are not delusional, techno-optimistic hippies, and a little bit. But the technology is evolving, and everything we do has an impact in the sense of like if you do a good project, that will allow someone to sell headsets. But hopefully, that will be the last piece of technology that you buy, and you can change something. So there is this aspect, but I'm not going to go into that. That's the thing that we figured on the way. This Umwelt, Jacob Oxwell coined the term in 1940s. It's basically what it's saying. The reality varies based on the sensory input of different specimen and sensory features of those specimen. For instance, we can share a space with a tick who lives in 6 frames per second, versus us, we live in 16 to 24 frames per second. So our perception of moment is 1/16 of a second versus them. So one of us living really fast, the other is really slow. And when you see those mosquitoes flying around, we are giants moving in slow-mo, whereas they are living in normal perception. So we wanted to tap into this aspect and look into different animals and insects. And we scanned the forest using this architectural tool called LiDAR scanner, and took that volumetric data to manipulate based on the sensory features of those animals. And later data looks like this. By default, you've got millions of points coming from this laser measurer, and then turning that into something. And we use this as a tagline, and each day kind of reminding ourselves, what are the things that we can't do without having that technology. If you can do this without having a virtual reality headset, let's not do it. So we designed a path for this forest. The experience doesn't start when you park your car where the visitor center is, and it's the most accessible area. We put it in a place that is 15 minutes walk in the trail, which is the optimum walk for you to lower your blood pressure, for you to calm down in Greenland. And we place those weird objects, half painted, half flocked, on the way, which you don't know what that is, but you are kind of taking those clues. And then you are stumbling upon those weird helmets tangling off a tree, an invigilator, a helper coming and helping you to put that on. And you are seeing that part of the forest through the eyes of 4 different animals and insects. And we started with a mosquito that sees CO2. And then you get eaten by a dragonfly that sees 300 frames per second, so everything moving slightly slowly, and they see full spectrum of light. So you are seeing the praise quite significantly there, and the environment is kind of infrared. And then that gets eaten by a frog that sees almost nothing. So all those facts kind of translated to a visual vocabulary for us, and we took it from there. So there is a real in-depth documentation of this piece online in Open Documentary Labs archive. So I'm not going to go too deep into this. If you are interested, please have a look there with all the visuals and everything. And there is one lightweight version is on Gear VR, which brought us to this interesting thing of how can we make it accessible for masses. You know, the distribution channels for virtual reality is extremely limited, and it's great to be in those international festivals, but you can only, reach so many people. And In the Eyes of the Animal has been traveling since we launched in 2015 September, and it has been on exhibits pretty much every other day. Only seen by 30,000 people in a headset, so we literally took every opportunity to make it more accessible.
And I think it's just worth noting that there's 2 strands to this, why this is interesting for us. One is a creative endeavour, which is how, sighting something in the forest was very much our first foray into multisensory. Almost like semi-accidental almost, because of the sighting of that piece. We needed, we realised that as we were designing it, and that kind of walk into the forest, the sitting down, that you were getting the smell of the forest, you were seeing the real site that we'd scanned digitally and in reality. We were playing with how you sensed that. We were playing with what you felt as you put this helmet onto your head. You weren't touching plastic of a VR headset. You were touching a flocked surface, which is kind of mimicking other like mossy surfaces around you in the natural world. So we were really starting to play with those things. And as we realised, okay, how do we get this out for more audiences beyond that of Grisdale Forest in the northwest of England? How do we get people to see it? We were like, how do we replicate those feelings or that story that we were trying to tell? And the answer is you can't. And I mentioned this yesterday when we spoke, that me being able to, as a producer and as a creative group, being able to control your experience of a piece is so crucial to us telling you a certain story. We want you to be in the forest. We want you to smell a certain thing. We want to talk to you about what you're about to see. We want to set the context correctly. When I put that on a Gear VR headset and you're sat in your living room with a phone that's probably working slightly less than you want it to be working, kind of pressing the buttons and getting frustrated and strapping this thing to your face, I can't control that context at all. And it freaks us out completely as creators go, oh my God, what does it mean? You'll just think it's crap. And so we have to really understand the transition from one type of experience to another. So we had to play with narrative and words, and we had to think about how does a piece with no language suddenly have language? What language should it be in? How should the writing be structured? Should it be scientific? Should it be poetic? And you can watch it and see what you think. maybe go to the forest. And then really just by chance, people kept kind of saying, oh, can you make it for this? Or could you do it for this platform? So for initially for Ron Arrod's Curtain Call, which I think you just saw here, which is a really wonderful structure that was built in the Roundhouse, which is a sort of 360 venue in London. And it's a structure with, and the kind of the wall is, for want of a better term, like plastic, lots
silicon
of silicon spaghettis, like hundreds of them. So it creates a very tactile wall that you can walk through, but you can also project on. And we were one of a few pieces that they showed. So this was, you can sit on the inside or you can stand on the outside, but this is our kind of it's a sort of collective way to see the work. And then we were asked to do it for Full Dome in Mexico City. So we then had kind of hundreds of people lying down and watching it. You know, I was lying next to a stranger watching this piece of work that I know really well, and it was like, wow, this is a really interesting way to experience the piece. And then, you know, putting it in public space and putting it in museums for sort of sensory exhibitions, and people kind of finding different angles to show our work. It's really, it's been a really interesting journey. And ultimately, you go from 30,000 people having seen it in headset to hundreds of thousands of people having seen it or downloaded it in different ways, which is great in terms of getting people to see your work, obviously. But also you go from having a piece of work to having a body of work, which is also a success. So then we wanted to just tell you about, I guess, having with little segues to tell you about different projects that maybe haven't been quite the same journey. But I guess what we did with the Singapore Arts Festival there, where we had the piece in the middle of the city, and we'd started putting in the Eyes of the Animal in different places. We're getting really interested about what do these works, what role do they play in public space? Like, how does immersive technology get out and be part of society? The access point is shocking in terms of the cost of these technologies in the home or in educational establishments. Museums and other institutions are moving slower, although definitely getting there in terms of getting these banks of equipment. But learning to operate them is obviously not in a slick way. It needs some work too. And we were approached by the City of Montreal, or the Cité des Spectacles, if I say that correctly, and Hull City of Culture, which was the UK festival for the UK City of Culture last year, to create a piece of work which used immersive technologies in public space. So they wanted a physical interface, whatever you choose that to mean, and they wanted it to use VR, and that's the only parameter that they gave us. And we had to work with Canadians. Well, shit. But that was a complete pleasure. Yeah. So we took up camp for quite a few weeks in Montreal last year and created a piece of work called the Colossal Wave. And a Colossal Wave is a triptych of pieces which explore human impact on the Earth and the Anthropocene in probably the most abstracted, bizarre way that we could have done. The triptych is firstly a piece of work, and do you want to play the video? Yeah. So this is the part one in the Phi Centre in Montreal, where you use your voice to create what we call voice fruit. But in headset, you're creating these kind of animations, and they're dropping live into another world. And that world can be seen under these umbrellas. And then the third part of this is that one person walks to the top of our shipping container, turned on its end, and drops a real-life bowling ball from the very top down onto this brass gong at the bottom. And as that hits... wait for the hearing, you sort of disrupt these voice fruits that have been created in the other world, and then you get eaten by an anglerfish. Spoiler. And so we worked with Headspace, who I know have been here before. DPT, I think, have joined you here. These are really wonderful kind of collaborators that are based in Montreal and now good friends of ours. And so that piece of work, our physical interface that we chose to use was a shipping container. It was... like for me, I guess as a producer, I wanted people to to know that the work was there, not through seeing someone kind of scurrying in the corner with a thing strapped to their face, but because we'd gone, hello, we just landed this thing in the middle of your city. Do you want to come and see what it's about? We needed a beacon. And it was just the most amazing production challenge as well. When a director says to you, I want to drop something really heavy from somewhere really high, you go, okay, great, let's do that. And so I think, so then we're just really fascinated by the role of these immersive technologies in public space. It's multisensory in a completely different way. It's not necessarily, and Ursula will talk about that again now, but it's kind of saying, well, what does it mean when groups of people come together and use these technologies? What's the narrative of you being over there a kilometre away and creating these voice fruits, and me smashing a ball on the ground and disrupting them, and like how does that narrative piece together as you cross a city? And we're kind of interested in windows on worlds and different perspectives on one story world. So this is kind of where we're going with this line of inquiry. And I guess the last piece to talk about with this is what's left over. We talk about this brass gong being shaped by 1,000 bowling balls. It's now, we've got 2 of these, one from Hull, one from Montreal. One's sitting on the wall of our collaborator in Montreal, and the other's on our studio wall. It's what starts as this pristine piece of brass is then mottled and shaped and bashed, and I guess it's this what is user-generated art. How do you have something completely analog and physical, which is created by a city or a group of people in a city, and how is that also part of this other digital world that we've been exploring or impacting every time you drop that ball? There you go. Now
this is the producer's nightmare. It's really difficult to travel with, so. I don't know if we can ever see the piece ever again, but from one large structure to another.
On that though, this has been seen by more people in a shorter period of time because of its scale. So now we've had 13,000 people through this in 5 months, which is again is a terribly low number, but quite interesting in terms of how you get that to reach people quickly. And it has been to 3 places already, and maybe a 4th soon. So there's a whole other conversation around the business model of this stuff, but it's a challenge, but it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm. It might be easier if you lived in the container while you traveled.
Exactly, and ship it around and go with the truck.
One of the original ideas was it was an old oil tanker that you could just drive around. They cost $30,000.
We looked into it.
Yeah, we need a Tesla truck. That's what we've decided.
So going into another large structure, that was the last slide that I showed in 2016 in Virtually There conference, and asking, can we dial into tree time? And that was part of the same kind of line of inquiry, looking into those specimen, lives in the forest, non-human, everything. And can we actually embody those creatures and beings in different ways? And obviously starting with the Sequoia Tree was quite interesting because it is something, I don't know, have you been to Sequoia National Park or have you seen one of those giants? It's the feeling of this center of universe literally shifts from you to something else. It's so significant and large that you feel useless. So we wanted to take that feeling to other places other than Sequoia National Park, so you can experience that in a gallery context. And so again, we applied the same rule kit, going there, scanning that part of the forest, and taking that data back to studio. But this time we recorded the humidity levels, biosignals of the tree, where they then went into a sonification process. So throughout the piece, what you hear is actually a sonified version, which you're going to hear in a bit, is the biosignals of that tree. So heartbeat of the tree translated to its sonic waves, as well as vibrations that you feel in your body as you climb up that sequoia. And there is no direct narrative. It's obviously, there's a time limit for various reasons. and you start on the bottom of the sequoia tree, and you follow a single drop of water being sucked by the roots and pump up to the canopy. And then you witness transpiration in this molecular level, where you can interact with oxygen and carbon particles. And the interesting thing with that was, looking into perception of another being. It was a bit easier to look into animals because we can still relate to that. There are eyes, there are, ears or ways of hearing. How would you become a sequoia tree or a drop of water? And that's really interesting because that led us to this research of what are those senses that we are using day-to-day lives and how we can manipulate those things. I'm going to come back to that and show you a timeline of this way of thinking. But I'm going to show you another image of this is the research that went into it, working with Salford University to understand how trees work. Well, apparently they all work exactly the same, apart from sequoias. Sequoias, they work exactly the same. One thing they can't figure it out is how they are sucking all that water to 300 feet, because there's this 90 feet gravity barrier, and no one has figured that out yet. So finding this out in 2018 was, fascinating, and still we don't know how they work, and they live 3,000 years. And their time perception is completely different than us. One tree witnessed entire civilization, or everything we know of today as history happened while that tree was just standing there. So how can we translate that to an experience? Obviously, the main barrier is our time perception. It's really difficult to hack unless you traumatize the audience, which we are trying to in a different way, and this is part of the journey that you are going up there. But going back to that multisensory aspect of how can you first familiarize with the creature, and then go into it and embody it. So we picked parts of that tree as physical objects and then recreated using really soft material, because sequoia trees have got this 90 centimeters deep bark. It's really soft, this nice huggable beast that you are looking at. So we wanted you to hug that tree and feel and put your head inside first and then slip into that perception. And pretty much journey was this. But for this very same reason of this limitation of physical structures, we've been interrogating how else you can embody the tree without touching it, but maybe providing a floor that would make you think that you are grounded in earth. So we came up with some solutions. This is the exhibition that's going on in Phi Center now. There are a few things that we tried here. One was obviously flooring, and this is a no-brainer. But the other one was the screen, because we wanted the piece to communicate what's going on inside and also please the audience that are waiting in the queue for like 2 hours sometimes. So how can you create this immersive room for them to understand and question certain things, as well as get a glimpse of what that installation is about. And in the process of making Tree Hugger, we were reading this incredible book, Hidden Life of Trees. If you haven't seen it, please have a look. It's beautiful, and it's mostly about how trees are nurturing each other, forming families, communicating. It's fascinating, and those facts coming from there. And then we decided to bring scent aspect into the journey and work with a startup from California. They were developing, it's still R&D process, developing this tiny device that can deploy up to 15-20 cents, almost like frame accurate. And then we started the timeline as we do for visuals. This happens there, that happens there, maybe the sound should be like this. But it was a failure, because scent doesn't work like vision or sound. Our perception of scent offset it, and for instance, the different notes in a scent can have different particle sizes. Therefore, your nostrils, your receptors, can take the small ones earlier than the large ones, where the scent gets perceived differently for everyone. So we went through this iteration process almost a month, and you could easily spend a year just fine-tuning this. So it's not finished yet. It's really expensive. But one interesting thing came out of that process was creating that narrative. We were trying to be non-scriptive and, completely non-linear narrative. But how can you map certain things in this linear time in order them to feel? So the final one became now template for us, the emotional arc. What do we want them to feel? Rather than a written script, what do we want them to feel when they see the Sequoia Tree for the first time, when the screen comes on? What do we want them to feel halfway through the tree? What do we want them to feel on top of the Sequoia? And those are kind of starting points of reshuffling audio, scent, and all the haptic narrative, as well as the visuals for us. Now working with two groups to identify, Paul Lotso, a neuroscientist, to identify whether this worked in a kind of lab condition. Can we pinpoint those visuals combined with the scent and haptics actually creates this aura for that very moment? And is that correct? So we did it intuitively by trial and error, asking people and putting them in the system. But we haven't got to a point that, right, this combination creates awe, this combination creates fear. You've got obviously low-hanging fruit, but we are exploring this, and all those things are hanging as question marks for the next projects. This is really interesting fact because when we showed the piece in Tribeca, most of the news came out emphasizing the scent aspect. When people were writing about it, although they can't remember whether it was good or bad, funny enough, they were writing about the scent aspect quite heavily. So that's kind of encouraging. But then, those are Aristotelian senses that's been identified, hundreds of years. But those are not the limits. There are way more senses in our body, or receptors, sensors, that we can tap into probably. And that brings me to that nice quote David Eagleman has been interrogating, but that brings me to these list of receptors that we can actually tap into. This one that I can't pronounce gives your organs a direction, sense of direction. So your vital organs can tell whether they're upside down or not, and warn you. But can we actually employ that feeling as a part of the experience to make you feel something other than these established feelings that are coming from your what you see, what you hear? Because again, David Eagleman's theory of feelings are those intermingling sensory inputs are data types. So, sound is one-dimensional data, vision is three-dimensional data coming to your brain and processed, and touch is one-dimensional data as well. What if you can switch those things into different dimensions? Can we create more feelings? Yeah? Yeah? No. I'll have a look.
Sensory substitution.
Amazing.
Tactile sensory substitution. He's been doing that since like the 80s.
I'll note that. I'll ask you after. Amazing. Right. And then it takes us to this place. How do you conceive something so much smaller than ourselves, like mycelium? In that Hidden Life of Trees, most of the book dedicated to mycelium, microcorrosial fungi that connects every living plant to each other, and they form the wood wide web. The wood wide web. It's fascinating because when you look at the blockchain and the mycelium, it's exactly the same thing. It's a distributed intelligence carrying certain contracts, if you like, and then a chemical conversation is constantly going on underneath that forest. And our question is, how can we embody that feeling? There are research going around how much your body can extend or how much your arm can get away from your body and what are the limitations, the cognitive limitations of that. And we were looking into those things. How can you embody something that is 25 miles spanning across? And I don't have questions. All those, I don't have answers. All those are questions, actually. But we start working with Louis Schwarzberg, who's doing a documentary about the fantastic fungi, the Wood Wide Web, again. And we start developing some looks. And that led us to how can we actually embody this? Again, this is a visual kind of interrogation. And we are trying to find the narrative within that for you to understand something much larger and much smaller than yourself. They are fascinating, by the way. You touch one part of the forest, it gets sensed by the other plant. If there's forest fire coming from one side, the other sequoias are warned and they start producing this fire repellent mineral for that reason. And sometimes you see a tree that's completely fallen, it's the stump, but turns out they are alive because they are keeping certain nutrients in their root system. Therefore, all the other trees are doing photosynthesis and channeling that carbon back to that tree to keep it alive. So, there are so many crazy things going on, and how can we, bring that to an experience and make people to feel and see where actually we can enhance our perception and become more human. This is the journey of carbon. The stomata opens up those tiny mouths in every leaf that sucks the carbon inside, and carbon travels through the branches and the tree, going down to the roots, and then gets transferred to another specimen, which they have a symbiotic relationship, where you're going to see now. So it kind of gives some of that carbon to the mycelium. And mycelium takes it and distributes across the forest. And those nematodes and mites underneath there helping it to distribute. So there is this, fragmented symbiotic relationship going on. Every square inch forest, and we are trying to actually visualize it. It's quite disgusting, but I hope you all had your food. So hopefully we will have a project to share next year. We are still working on it in many aspects. But also then there are those concepts and incredible things happening far away. And maybe we can apply the same rule kits to that concept because, gravitational waves, incredible. It's probably the only invention mankind arrived by meaning to do it. Everything was kind of a mistake or a coincidence. We were looking for something, found this thing, and it's fascinating. This 100 years process taking us to invention of, or finding of gravitational waves. But the concepts are so big, like 62 sun-size collision happened 1.3 billion years ago. What does it mean? I can't relate to that concept by any means. So, again, how do we conceive something so much greater than us, like a black hole? Probably developing a muscle memory towards those concepts can help us to do that. And that's another project we are working on currently. We are launching end of this year, the first version of it, and there will be lots of questions around it. So I don't want to, how are we doing with the time?
We're good with time. We can
Yeah, we still.
Oh, awesome.
have some questions, but because
Sure.
there's less of us, don't feel shy to ask questions.
Yeah, please.
There's you may have heard of it, but there's a novel that just came out that's been getting extraordinary press that's all about the relationship between trees and people.
Okay.
It's just amazing. It's called The Overstory.
Amazing.
That one.
Not overstory.
The Overstory, it's been called the best the novel from the perspective of the trees and relationships with people.
Ordered. So this is the initial kind of loop development for this, but we still have a long way to go because those are still, slightly polished scientific visualizations. We want people to feel what happens if if a black hole appears in your kitchen and like in the size of a coffee cup. What does it mean? And then you can start relate to that concept.
I think what we're trying to do is understand if this is the science as we know it and how the researchers describe it, how do we as artists translate that concept into our practice and tell that story to our audience? That's effectively what we're trying to do. And then how do we do that in a way which is multisensory if that story needs to be like that is cross-platform. There's a really interesting distribution network in planetariums. There's a lot of those around the world. Us as 360-degree content creators aren't using those necessarily. Like, we kind of think there should be a revolution in using these places like as new cinemas, and when that's not quite happening for various reasons, because they're not really a network, they're kind of individual, but we see a real potential for that. And so now we're trying to just work out, okay, so yeah, if a black hole does appear in your kitchen, what does that mean? How do we tell that story? How do we tell it in cross languages, across cultures?
Yep. This is look development for spaghettification. It's such a weird phenomenon, and what happens if that happens in your kitchen? And interrogating those parts. I think that's kind of all. I was like rushing. Sorry if you missed something. So we can have talk.
So can I just follow? Story. Story is a really intriguing concept. There are lots of forms. So what do you do when you have a natural phenomenon like that sort of is larger than our comprehension? I guess you don't want to just impose a kind of human story on it unless you think that's going to help us understand it. But how do you think of story in those terms?
It's a good question. I mean, I think we've been going around. I think, if from my point of view, and you might have a different point of view, from my point of view as a producer working with 3 very different creative directors in MLF, who all have a slightly different approach, but often have usually gone to not using words. They've come from very visual backgrounds, all of you do, and so would go to a place of audio-visual, and audio not necessarily with script or with words, to kind of get a feeling across or get a sense across or tell a story that way. So I think as they evolve and we evolve creatively as a group, that's not satisfactory anymore. We're kind of digging deeper into narrative and story and trying to find different ways to tell those things. For the gravitational waves, for the distortions in space-time piece, we found it incredibly difficult to kind of to match the creative timeline, the time that we had to make the piece, and the creative process, and a kind of writing phase. So it's not really answering a question at all, but I guess we approach it from how are there different angles on this? What are the multi-sensory ways that we want to tell that story? And then ultimately, how do we write a script that embodies us and our way of thinking of that? And we definitely haven't nailed it yet, hence why all of our projects don't use language, apart from the animal.
There's a guy who just died actually this year, Hayden White. And White was a historiographer, wrote a lot about French Revolution, and he does an analysis of different tellings of the French Revolution. And his contention is that where you start the story determines what the story is, and whether it's going to be a tragedy or comedy, or whether it's even about the revolution. So of course we're all inclined to think in very causal terms. This is where it begins, and it causes this, and it concludes there. And I know every version of black hole stories I've heard have been exactly that. So I'm just intrigued as to how to disrupt that, to see it like with the tree. It's very fresh.
It's exactly that. That's the main question for us, because we immerse ourselves working with astrophysicists to understand the concept first, completely like going into it, and then how can you simplify this to a level that's so intuitive and without telling you what's going on there, can you actually understand? That's why I'm using the word muscle memory, like developing muscle memory towards something, because obviously virtual reality allows us to embody something or go into that world and develop muscle memory. But one side note on this that we are currently working on is a project around taste, and it's called Sweet Dreams. And part of it is working on different technologies to create a piece of art and track different objects. Like when you eat this in VR, you should need a representation happening there, and those are technical challenges. But the idea is, what if you have a telescopic straw that you can point to the moon and suck the moon? What does it taste like? It's like, those are the concepts we are kind of, is it chalky, is it sweet, is it sour? It's like, obviously it's speculation, but at least to enhance the way we understand that story, at least looking from a different point of view. Because I'm sure there will be incredible documentaries and films that will be communicating the actual message, but for us it's just like, how can you alter that? Yeah, I don't know. Cheese?
Everybody knows that moon is made of cheese, Brian.
Yeah,
Yeah, I hate cheese.
yeah.
I can't eat cheese.
So are you done, are you moving into the black hole, or are you staying with the tree, are you working in the tree, a metaphor more, or?
Working at the same time. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, they are, okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in you know, molecular level, exactly the same phenomena we are looking at. So, yeah.
Because I actually think the mycelium acts as their own peptide receptor mutation.
Yeah.
It
It's
looks quite similar.
Yeah.
they used
that's
in Star Trek mycelium. I don't know if you've seen the new series mycelium as a way of a quantum travel that you
space
can.
travel.
Yeah, it's like intergalactic travel, amplified by mycelium, can happen everywhere. It's beautiful. So there is that kind of connection as well, in kind of pop sci-fi.
Can I ask you a question? So I noticed that on all of your pieces, you created your virtual environment in like Maya Houdini. Have you guys ever done anything in real world? So true VR and real time kind of?
No, Maya Houdini actually.
Yeah.
It's often real time.
Oh really?
Yeah, all those things.
No, I mean like it seems like it was created in a 3D environment.
Oh, the last one, so Tree Hugger, in the Eyes of the Animal, real scans of a forest, and then that data manipulated in real time.
It was using a node-based system called VVVV, which is a custom software that we created. Oh no, we didn't create, that we worked with people to create.
To go into that, right?
Sure.
Yeah, that's
Well,
the base.
the LiDAR is the main environment. We decimate that to a level. And the really interesting thing about LiDAR scans, you know, you can get like photorealistic scans like this. Let me show you. 8 billion points look like that. It looks like this, and you can scale it up 10 times, and it looks like Grand Canyon and this incredible detail. It's impossible to visualize in real time for virtual reality. So computational power is not enough to do it. So we start playing with this abstraction idea, so decimating points, but because it's coming from a real source, human mind somehow makes the connection. It doesn't look like so abstract that everyone thinks it's a real forest, for instance. So that's the abstract real kind of balance we found. Is quite interesting and still kind of interrogating that part.
Yeah, we do a bit of Houdini for the distortions in space-time. We did the VFX, obviously, for the mycelium is straight VFX pipeline, and Colossal Wave was made in Unity. So we're sort of horses for courses, or whatever. We use whatever is the best tool for the job.
I think it's something really interesting about the natural network that's created by mycelium and by the parity maybe with artificial intelligence. Of course, artificial intelligence looks nothing like this amazing network that's under the ground, but it attempts to be. You know, and again, the artifice out of what's already there, that maybe perhaps that we sense is there, we just can't see it. I mean, sort of thing going on in our bodies as well as externally and in the forest, or even the, you know, how the whole cycle of carbon monoxide recycling works. So I feel like there's something natural. I personally am interested in sort of visualizing some of the digital algorithms that are out there. And so what I really like is that there are so many instances in nature, in particular your project, that is both digital but also very strongly adhering to the wood wide web. You know?
Yeah.
I feel that's something really neat and a really cool place to examine.
It's that's definitely like providing a visual reference helps so much
I know.
or in any of those concepts, but also really interested in, you know, there's this emotional heat map of body that's I think I mean those images coming from there. So Polymorph, this is studio from Netherlands. They are doing a project. This is emotional heat map. This is what happens when you're neutral. When you're surprised, this part of your body gets warmer, and there's the whole map is online. And they created this suit that you go underneath. It looks like a human toaster, and pixel by pixel, and they play some of those feeling, the heat map, back to your body to create, reverse engineer the feeling. And it's fascinating because that's like, what would be the embodiment of AI in that sense? What would be the feeling that you can play back to human body? Rather than providing a visual reference point, what would be the feeling reference point of that? So that's the part that we are really, well, I mean, I am personally really interested in, and hopefully we'll do something with Polymorph and just like bring that feeling. So it's like going hand in hand, I think.
Right, and so much of the intelligence is taken away from the body, so it makes sense for the body to be informing.
Exactly, in a reverse way, yeah.
Was this sort of a pixel blanket thing that you
Yeah.
wrote under?
Yeah.
Did it work for you?
Not much. I love the premise of it.
Yeah, me too.
It's
The premise is terrific.
yeah. It's I've tried.
It felt like a medieval torture.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's quite intense.
Grilled cheese.
Yeah.
You feel like you're pressed with-
Human waffle. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Joe, we were talking about last night, weren't we? There's it's so close, there's so many things that you could do with this, but also the kind of narrative, the story that they were telling, I could visualize it very easily. Therefore I felt I just matched the sensory to the narrative that I was hearing, and I wasn't then challenged that much. It was just a kind of very linear thing.
Yesterday, someone brought up the concept of God helmet in the class. It's recording someone else's brainwaves in electrical signals and playing that back to someone else to stimulate whatever that feeling is. So I think there's a great kind of field of research there that we can employ. I don't know where does it take us, but you know that's the interesting bit. Like, what would happen in your brain if it was connected to 25 miles network, and how does that feel? And I don't know. It's questions.
Small question, because I was trying to find a good description of Marshmallow Laser Feast, like in a nutshell, and I got to kind of almost spy on you because I had to look at so many articles and
Because our web presence is so terrible.
Yeah, what is
Yeah.
that? But you did have a project about depth, or could that be? So there was a project that was kind of tagged with Marshmallow Laser Feast, and it was our relationships to our bodies as they're aging and decaying.
Yeah, well, it's not aging, decay. I don't know if that's the one, but the idea for mycelium is you lay on the floor deflates, and you sink into the soil. As you die, your body decomposes by the mycelium, and then you embody it. So that's the narrative that we are thinking to start that experience with. I don't know if we reveal that somewhere, but that might be the one. Yeah, you die and you die and yeah.
What an argument against cremation. I never thought of it.
No, it's true, right? And this is something quite personal to me at the moment, but been having that conversation a lot, and how the burning of things, you know, it's a carbon impact. There's an environmental impact of that, and actually, that decomposition is potentially, you know, you're coming from what you've taken from all your life.
But solidification process, solidifying body, they are doing it in Australia, with just like $10,000 or something, and they give you this nutrient-rich 5 liters liquids as your, you know, loved one or whoever. But then you can plant a few trees, and they become trees. I'm loving that idea of, you know, just like becoming a tree after life. Well, this form of life. Yeah.
But maybe you could actually the other thing they're doing in Australia is they're making these kind of like halls to wrap people into,
Yeah.
so that they more naturally disintegrate into
Yeah.
the soil. But I was thinking is you could actually take sort of reverse engineer the mycelium and create some DNA and create a new material to wrap participants in,
Yeah.
like, and create sort of like haptic sensors inside these like.
Feeling.
Without
Yeah.
Yeah, that's creepy.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like the
I was thinking
the
inside.
upside down, what is it, Stranger Things, the upside down?
Yeah.
Is it after the mycelium? Is it after you're, you know, in the eyes of the animal? Like, what is it with everybody like fascinated and creeped out by these like branches that like extend out into space and into you, into your brain back?
Unsure, but I think the death link is a 2-in-1, 2 projects in one. It was scanning of faces of elderly people, who I think is for a video clip or something like that.
Oh,
that was
yes.
And I
Chameleon,
was
maybe.
reading the other
The
things
second
today.
life of a human being as a digital avatar. We've scanned someone. She's an old actress, and she's now 80. After that, but she's now 80, but her avatar is traveling around the world in design biennials in the form of 3D printed bust and the video of her, but not her photogrammetry model, and as we explore her body as a landscape. So it might be this.
How old is she in that?
I think she's 88. It was, yeah. Now she's 81. Yeah, wait, 4 or 5 years ago, I think. It's called Geolog Memex. Yeah, Memex.
It was for a music video, so it was pretty straight. It wasn't 360.
What, beyond the 5 senses, which, from your research, do you find most promising in like a media or art context? The body balance, other than inner ear, that the one that lives around or kind of containing some of our vital organs, quite interesting. And I had an experience close to that. You are blindfolded, and without you realizing, actually the wall that you are leaning on is slightly tilting. By the end of this 5 minutes, which you definitely don't realize, your body is sideways. And the obvious gravity changes, and you don't know what's going on. Your blood pressure is changing, your hands are getting kind of lighter, but your head is getting heavier, and you can't put a finger on. And then you realize, oh, I'm actually upside down now. So that's the way they use it, for instance. And you know, probably there are ways that we can explore these other senses. It's really interesting. It's a project called Door into Dark by Anagram. Have you done it? Yeah. That's quite fascinating to me. Yeah.
I knew I was going.
You didn't like it?
I felt, I was aware I was going upside down.
Yeah, were you?
Yeah.
I wasn't. I've done it in Eindhoven. Maybe it was faster because
Yeah.
mine was extremely slow, and the soft feeling
Yeah, on the grass.
definitely didn't realize till I'm, you know, it's 75 degrees or something. It's quite
Yeah,
fascinating.
maybe.
But I think that you've tapped into something that we've had, like our AI discussions out of context, but they can last forever, because with all the focus being put on how our brains function and how we're trying to emulate them into machines, we even talked about this a little bit yesterday, we sometimes forget how our senses work and how we know very little about how these senses work. And you've just made me think about the tilting. So many theme parks that are not as popular in North America, but seem to, well, North America, if you include Mexico, yes, but seem to be from Mexico down to the border, a lot of theme parks are opening up that are all sense-based.
Right.
So there's one that I didn't experience at all, but apparently they've recreated the entire village. So let's say you're going down a hill, but the visuals make you feel like you're going up a hill. And from the recalling of Francis that you did yesterday, so my boyfriend who was there for research, he goes, it's weird, we're all working in media, we have teams with it that work in VFX, there's people working in, you know, installations, we're all supposed to be good with science. And we're there, we all suddenly feel drunk. Nobody's able to walk, we're like holding on to stuff, and our minds can't understand what is going on until somebody realized water was going upstream. And I was like, oh, they tricked us, and then you see the trick.
Yeah.
But just like
Yeah.
understanding how our brains function and then flipping that to create an experience is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking into perception of space, and all the sensory inputs, and then how can we actually hack it is probably the starting point of that. The other one was the resolution of your skin. You know, it's like on your back, it's 1 centimeter square. Your fingertips is 20 times more, and your lips probably 40 times more than that. So how can we create something, maybe a suit or a interface that can use this aspect? And if you were to grow as a mycelium, do you need to think with your brain or just using your fingertip and such a small interaction to do that? So, you know, those are the things that we are interrogating now. What is the smallest interaction that you can have to have the largest impact, and where does that take us? So, yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing, your question about story, or your point about that before, because it's sort of changing like what the story is or what the story world is, right? If you're just talking about, there's a fascination in just the concept, and I think a lot of what we've been doing is just exploring the singular concept rather than trying to also tell a story about that. And that, I think, I don't know, it's just we're kind of playing with that, you know. Can you create a story out of a concept, or what happens when you try and put a narrative world in there or a structural narrative in there as well? Like, do they even fit together? I don't know. I'm sure they do, but we're just working that out. Yeah.
Emerging the two worlds too. So a couple of us were at Sundance. Maybe you were too. This year there was a group called Haptics.
Ultra Haptics.
Ultra Haptics, was it? From the UK? No?
No. They're, it looked like a tech show, but it's two guys from the US actually. But Haptics is just a glove, and then the other experience, one was a mobile glove, so you could use your hand and move it around. One was a fixed glove. So they haven't found a way to use both at the same time. One only has a couple of sensory points, so not that many. And they're not that precise, but because your brain fills in the gaps, that's where it becomes magical. So you have an experience with a VR headset where you have a little fox going around your hand. There's some wheat that you can play around with.
Eat the fox.
You could try.
Nibble on the fox, yeah.
I try to give it things, you know, you can make, there's a little cloud that feels like ping pong balls to your hand, but it's just how crazy, it's this little couple of points, I guess it's not more than 16. But with the visuals, your brain fills in the gaps, and it becomes really interesting.
There's a group in the UK called Ultra Haptics who are doing it with air.
Yeah.
So they just have hundreds and hundreds of air nodes. Is that the right technical term?
Piezo.
And they're blowing up, and so as your kind of hands are there, you feel
Like
the shape of the object in VR, but based on the pressure that you feel from the air.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
You're wearing, or are you putting your
No,
hands
it's
in?
putting your
It's an interface this size, so you can feel up to 30 centimeters above that surface. It's limited with its size, obviously. So as an interface, it's great for, I don't know, contactless dashboards and, you know, just turning the stove on without touching it. But in the sense of future, I think it's limited with its size. So
That's
it.
what I mean. Like, you could see the two differences. One of them, you could only put your hand in, feel warmth or cold, exactly like the human toaster model. But you had VR, so sometimes you would have like an ice cube or a little dragon, and suddenly the heat from the dragon really feels hotter than the other example you had before. That's just your brain filling in the gaps. That was fine, but when they added kind of a story where you could feel like it's a child's model of a farm, and then there's clouds and the sun and wheat and a fox, and became a whole other story. I wanted the other hand to really play with things, but just bring in that technology into a world where it means something, and you're making sense of what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Is something more intriguing. That hasn't
Absolutely.
been tapped into.
Yeah. Totally.
Any more questions for our super guests? Well, you guys have been awesome yesterday and today.
Thank you.